Hey guys, Andrew Dowling here and Mitch Kurtz. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the AltMed podcast. Make sure to hit like and subscribe because we've got heaps more content coming out and it's really fun and great and we love it all. Also very good.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the AltMed podcast. Great to have you with us as always. If you like what we do, please remember to hit like and subscribe. With me as always, my co-host, Mitch Kurtz. Mitch, you're looking pretty fresh.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate that.
and we are absolutely thrilled. We have some Melbourne royalty with us today recording. We have from Leven Health, the Managing Director, Mark Brayshaw, and the coach of the Richmond Football Club, Damien Hardwick. Sticks, Dimmer, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure, guys. How are we?
Very well, very well. Look, we know that Leven Health has had a few AFL coaches that it's been associated with. Dimmer, we first, I think, saw your name associated with medicinal cannabis midway through last year. I read a couple of reports, but perhaps we can kick off with you just talking through your own journey with medical cannabis.
Yeah, it was I sort of stumbled upon it at a certain stage. Obviously, through my professional career, had been heavily involved with anti-inflammatories and, towards the back end of my career, probably had a heavy reliance on those, but sort of became, like most people that rely on them enormously, your stomach sort of ceases to function properly, with the heavy use. So then, obviously, over the course of time with my coaching career, I managed to get sore and sore. I had significant lower back pain, which was probably brought about by a mountain biking accident where my ambitions got certainly mixed up with my ability. And I got referred to a gentleman by the name of Dr. James Stewart that sort of went through a really thorough process to sort of put me on a recommendation of pain management, and it was the first time I was introduced to the medicinal marijuana, which look, if I'm being completely honest, it's been a game changer for me. It's been life-changing in more ways than pain management. It's also been a big one with stress reduction and my focus has increased as well, which is certainly a benefit to my personal, but more importantly, my professional life also.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
When Dr. Stewart or Jim first had you in for the consult, did you sort of think you were going in there potentially going to get opioid therapy or something, and he's presented cannabis to you? Did it throw you a little bit?
Yeah, no doubt. Look, I was probably, like most people, that was when I sort of thought initially of medicinal cannabis, I'm thinking about guys, with Bob Marley type hair and those sort of things. And probably one of the biggest benefits of me and Leven Health and the sports advisory committee is just raising the awareness of the product itself and sort of getting away with the stigma that's associated with it. Like, it's completely legal. And, as I said, I went through a really thorough process with Dr. James. I don't know why I call him Dr. James. It's just Dr. James to me.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? We do the same. Yeah. Dr. James is ridiculous.
But then when he sort of suggested this recommended treatment, it sort of raised my awareness of it. And I did a bit of research and went away. And like I said, it's been a real game changer for me, both from a pain management, but also from a performance point of view as well, which my focus and management of my stress in one of the more stressful occupations in the country has been incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just wondering, did you cop a bit from the boys when you first got on? I can imagine that would be kind of the situation, he's going to toke on a few of the, that kind of situation.
Yeah, there was a few gags and once again, players like most people are probably unaware of that it's actually just in a liquid form that you place, you take orally. And, they thought during the game I'd be up in the back smoking a few cones out the back before giving them a verbal barrage at quarter time and half time. But, it's amazing the amount of conversations you now have and a lot of referrals I've sort of spoken to people about that are in significant pain, not only players, but more importantly, their family members that we've sort of started to direct down this path, which is, improved awareness, but also improved their quality of life also.
And so tell us about if if you're happy to speak about it, whether it's just CBD or if you're also hitting Brayshaw's blunt.
Yeah, I am traditionally CBD once a day, but what I have tended to do, obviously, as I said, the stress of the job can become quite overwhelming. So I have started to take THC at various stages. In particular, when I'm feeling quite anxious, and it does quite settle me down just before I go to bed. And the other one is generally after night games, when you're sort of wired, and I want to take it down and I just want to get some sleep before I've got to go back to work the other day. And I found it incredibly beneficial. It does help me sleep, but it does decrease my anxiety levels, which is also really important, which then allows me to perform and get back to my best quicker.
Interesting. And I imagine it's actually an interesting question to ask somebody who's, a sports person. Do you feel like a lot of people talk about the concern around maybe having, a hangover equivalent the next day. And I'd expect that a sports person would experience that to another level because they can actually judge their performance the next day. Do you think there would be that kind of impediment going forward, if you were taking more THC, let's say?
Well, what I did do is, like I said, once again, with Dr. James, as I call him again, I spoke to him about it at length, and it was a bit of a trial and error about, the dosage level and that working for me. And I know what dosage works for me now, if that makes sense. I started off at a really low amount and just increased it to the level that I got, the best performance for myself. So I think with the right people around you and the right understanding of the people that are recommending the treatment, you'll certainly get the right result from it.
Yeah, definitely.
So what about the I guess I'm just curious because I know with the referral to Dr. Jim, but what about the club doctors at Richmond? I know their focus is on player performance, but do you think there's when you're speaking to them, I'm not sure if you have about it, is there an awareness or growing awareness even among club doctors around the role that different compounds within cannabis may play therapeutically?
Yeah, absolutely. But once again, it's probably still scratching the surface with regard to that. But the great thing is, Lauren Jackson's such an incredible example, and there's been some other players that have just recently retired as well. But, Lauren obviously has had the therapeutic use exemption, and I think that is something, and trust me, I've been down the anti-inflammatory path and I know how unsustainable it is. But, with that therapeutic use exemption, it could be a real game changer for AFL footy, especially players towards the back end of their career that are dealing with, crippling injury. And a guy, for example, that comes to mind is, a gentleman that was a terrific player for us, Kane Lambert, that was cruelled by injury at the end. And, he unfortunately didn't have the option to take it or, the procedure to work through to give himself an opportunity. But I'd imagine that with Lauren and the understanding, and I'm pretty sure there's studies in place now that are going to open up these doors that are going to allow really, really good players and people to play for a longer period of time, which is great for the game of AFL footy and great for sport in general.
Well, sorry, I just want to unpack the, I guess, what happens to an elite athlete toward the end. You finished up your playing days at Port. What was it like in the last sort of few seasons? Like, I guess, that routine that you go through of anti-inflammatory, does it just begin to not, actually give you any efficacy? Is that sort of how it works?
Yeah, it does. And the dosage increases, which obviously has significant impact on your internal mechanisms. And it just becomes unsustainable. When I sort of, and the fact is athletes will want to play the game. I loved it and wanted to play for as long as I can. But the fact of the matter is, one, age catches up with you, but obviously it's such a brutal game as AFL football and rugby and basketball are. You're sort of going against the tide with your body. So, the great thing that I like about, medicinal marijuana is the fact that it is a natural product. So, it is generally something that will be beneficial, I shouldn't say beneficial, but you're putting something in your body that's plant-based, if that makes sense, and it's got some benefits with that. So I sort of think more players that get towards the back end of their career, if we can go down this path, it'll be incredibly beneficial for those players.
And do you think there's a place maybe in the future once some of those, that stigma changes, I guess, could you see a place for cannabis or medical cannabis in the season, basically, like in the earlier parts of the career as well? Like, do you think there's ever a place, maybe CBD, maybe THC? I mean, I tend not to think of it as a performance enhancing drug, but you've got a better insight to that.
Yeah, and I think now Sticks might be able to correct me here if I'm wrong, because he's done bugger all on the show thus far, so he might be able to
we'll bring him in.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure there's been studies done with regard to the CBD, that the performance enhancing aspect is not as beneficial as some may have suggested. Sticks, you might have more knowledge on that.
Yeah. I don't know about the studies, but I've heard Peter Bruckner. So Peter Bruckner's doing some research for us. Really a world famous sports scientist and a sports doctor, and been at several AFL clubs and the Olympics and Liverpool, Australian cricket team. I've heard him say, in his opinion, medicinal cannabis is performance diminishing rather than performance enhancing. And so Dimmer's already spoken about Lauren. I mean, Lauren made a comeback on the basis of the pain being much more manageable, and hell of a lot of hard work, by the way. I mean, she had to get back into shape and so forth, but eventually she submitted herself to the mercy of the authorities, and there is no way that they would have allowed her to take medicinal cannabis and play in the World Championships if it was performance enhancing. So I agree with Dimmer's point earlier, and there is no doubt in my mind that in the near term, therapeutic use exemptions will be applied for by athletes just like Lauren in other sports, including AFL footy. If Australian sport has already set the precedent with Lauren, I just can't see any reason why somebody who's got chronic pain and is taking opioids, for example, or maybe anti-inflammatories, wouldn't be able to get a TUE. I don't understand why it wouldn't happen. And in actual fact, I think I'm pretty confident it will. And listening to Peter Bruckner, I'm not surprised Lauren got it, because in his very professional opinion, it's performance diminishing rather than performance enhancing.
Yeah, well,
I'm wrong. It was removed by by USADA in the prohibited.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say it's been taken off WIDA's list. The CBD.
Yeah, the problem is the THC. That's the THC. So what normally happens is, if you get CBD isolate, two things. Okay, this is the concern of the sport is there's a trace of THC.
Yeah.
And everybody's very, very frightened about putting an athlete in harm's way by having an absolute tiny, minuscule trace of THC. So I think that's, yes, CBD on its own, but it's not as efficacious in many people's minds without a bit of THC. So Lauren's TUE allowed her to take CBD with a trace of THC in it. And I think that's really interesting, and where that leads is fascinating.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I'm just wondering, obviously Damien's across on board with it, let's say, and some of the other representatives you have are obviously on board. But do you get met still with a bit of that old school thinking by some other professionals in the industry that are just like, nah, you've cooked it. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, do you still get that when you're out there, even when you have, grade A celebs on board, let's say?
Well, I'll tell you what does happen. We get a lot of everybody's comfortable. Most people are comfortable, Dimmer, with the oil, but I get lots of ex-athletes drawing a line in front of vaping, and in fact, they just can't. Some of them can't get their head around that. Now, I say to them, well, it's once again, it's all through. The first thing I say is you've got to go and see a GP. This is not. We try and decouple the recreational debate.
Yeah,
you go and see a GP, if your own preferably, but if you can't, go and find one. And Dr. James is really good, but they'll only give it to you if they think it's in your interest. I don't know about you, Dimmer, but the vaping is a bridge too far for some people.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, I've got a job that's quite public, so I get it more over the fence from the fans, to be perfectly honest. If we've had a bad day at the office, so get bongs, Dimmer, and all that sort of stuff. But generally, most people I meet, like I've been, the amount of people that stop me down the street and ask me the story and ask for recommendations, and people are becoming more and more open to the fact that this is actually a genuine bona fide thing that can help them, one, deal with pain, but help them, navigate through life through these things. So I think it's becoming bigger and bigger, and I'm really looking forward to where it actually ends up, and how much it can actually help people, not only in like you're probably talking before, with a reactive but a proactive type mentality to the medicinal marijuana also.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, it also depends to some extent. I mean, I know we have these international bodies that govern, doping and the like, but it's also, it can be league specific. I think we touched on when we spoke with Lauren on the podcast that, in the NBA, they've decided to abandon testing for THC. So I'm not saying that that's a leave pass for all of the athletes in there, but, I certainly haven't seen in the few matches that I've watched, it's not as though there's been some marked difference in the standard or anything like this. So I think it is league specific. So I'd be interested to see what some of the big codes, whether there's a difference between them in Australia in how they govern things. But just turning to, I suppose, the point you touched on earlier, Dimmer, around focus, or giving you back a little bit of focus and helping with stress and anxiety. Can you talk us through what that's like? Does your CBD use spike in September? How does it work?
Yeah. No, it's funny because I obviously take a certain amount in the morning when I first wake up, but then I take another smaller amount towards around 3 o'clock. I start to get a bit tired in my old age. Me and Sticks are normally napping around that stage, but mentally I start to strain a little bit, and I take a small amount just as a top up to realign and refocus. And I found it works really, really well for me. Once again, this was spoken in consultation with Dr. James, I should say, and just work my way through it. But what I have found is, through this whole period, my focus has been something that does wane from time to time, but I've found it more consistently refined, I think, when I started on the CBD. So I've been really impressed with what it's done for me, and more importantly, my performance with the side.
Yeah, we find that a lot of people report that it's kind of subtle at first, and you don't really realize it necessarily, but then if you stop, then you're like, oh, that's what I was missing. And is that kind of consistent with the experience you've had, or?
Yeah, it's funny because I recently went overseas for about 6 weeks, and I ran out sort of thing when I was over there, and I noticed pain first and foremost. My back started to become more agitated, and I was on holiday, so I wasn't working as much, but I did become a little bit more agitated as well. But it was funny, when I got back, the first thing I did was get my prescription filled and went from there. So it certainly is noticeable for me. It did take a little bit of time initially when I started the CBD for it to kick in, probably about anywhere between, I think it was somewhere between 3 weeks before I started to really notice that with my back pain. I still have the rumblings, but I have nowhere near the acute pain that I previously had, which has been really important. But what I will say, though, is even when I was away for a period of time, it was 4 weeks before I really started to feel the impact. So I think there is a build up there that it does sustain you for a period of time also. Well, what I found anyway.
And in the interest of a well-balanced conversation, let's say, are there any downsides? Would you consider that fast or better recovery is performance enhancing in some aspects? What are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. It is funny because we sort of look at all things, and caffeine and drugs that allow you to do things when they're numbing pain, and
Red Bull
sort of things. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that we do look at with regard to that do sort of not necessarily get you above your level of performance, but they keep you to your level of performance. Like I'm not going to get smarter or anything by taking this drug. I'm actually just going to be able to work to my potential more, if that makes sense, for a longer period of time, which I think is really, really beneficial, and certainly helps me with my workload as well.
So ethically, you're on board, basically, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. The curious question I've got is, people are obviously talking about recreationalizing the industry and THC being available at your local vape store, let's say. I'd be very curious to know what happens then. What would you imagine the AFL's take would be if this was the same as a beer, let's say?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably a little bit like myself. I always like to be, professionally informed. And, it was funny. I was in the States recently, and there was a massive line in Manhattan. I thought, it must be like a superstar rocking up to open like Taylor Swift or something like that. Anyway,
They knew you were coming.
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly wasn't that. But it was actually the opening of one of the first official legalized store, marijuana store or something. I'm not exactly sure what it was, so it certainly wasn't Swift. But I think from my own personal point of view, the more you are informed with a professional with regard to this, I think is certainly beneficial and probably, and there's no question that's the path that the AFL will go down as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think I actually saw some of that fanfare, some of the photos on Twitter, and I'm sure it'll be the first of many. But yeah, I think it's always, with these big sporting bodies, I think they generally, of course, they play it safe. But once there's actually a change in the law, that just immediately removes the stigma. I know there's been a lot of conjecture about the AFL's drug policy over the years, but even as recently, I'm thinking of, I think it was Willie Rioli, West Coast, and it's definitely, he's, one of many players that has had a so-called indiscretion with cannabis, and all that sort of will look a little bit ridiculous when we move to a situation if cannabis is legalized. I suppose, do you find it that it's a topic where we are, having been over in the States, do you think we are just a little bit behind the 8 ball here in terms of catching up with the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's probably hard for me to answer. It's funny because when I was over there, I think Kevin Durant, I think he's a medicinal marijuana user, is he? Yeah, so he's only one of the best players in the world. But look, I think it's a little bit like everything. It's slowly, and I'm probably a little bit with Sticks in this one. You still with the Sticks? Yeah, is there?
Yeah.
Probably a little bit with Sticks in this one. I think it will just take time. They'll speak to the right people, and the AFL are very good at actually anything that can help people. I think they'll eventually start to implement within the game.
Agree. Just thinking as well about the leadership on this issue from yourself. Who else have you got, Sticks? I think I've seen Chris Scott, John Longmire, Alistair Clarkson.
Yeah, so we've got lots of shareholders in the company, football or sport, Trent Robinson. So we've got plenty of shareholders that like the sector and are interested in it. But our sport advisory board is Lauren Dimmer, Alistair Clarkson, Damien Oliver, and Andrew Johns. Now, not many Melburnians will know Joey Johns, but everybody in New South Wales and Queensland does. And
we all know Joey Johns.
Yeah.
We're not living under a rock, Sticks. He's a pretty good player.
Yeah,
he is, and he's an even better bloke. But his life has his is a fascinating story. He had all sorts of neck problems, and and his life. He said it's not just a game changer; it's a life changer. So his advocacy's really important. I think that going back to the US though, just to be really clear, medicinal cannabis is legal in Australia and has been since 2016. It is illegal at a federal level in the US.
Yeah.
Medicinal cannabis. So we are, the TGA reports recently indicated a significant rise in usage. It's, there are more and more GPs and health professionals with it. And, in many ways, Australia's out the front. So, I try and decouple the discussion between recreational and medicinal because they really are different. And Dimmer's point's very true. If you see a doctor, the doctor will only prescribe it if he or she thinks it's appropriate, and they don't always do it. Whereas, going to a shop in Times Square, you just walk in and there's probably not a doctor sitting behind giving you a consult. So I try and all the jokes, I got the same thing when I took this job. Somebody asked me if the company car was going to be a combi.
Wait, is it?
I've always liked combis. That's when I had I had 4 sons living at home. Now I got none, and I ain't driving a combi. But so there's that humour. I mean, I don't like to be too straight, but the role that our sport advisory board has done is given case study cut through and shone a light on the fact that it's legal. Go and see a GP, and for some people, not all, can make a big difference.
Interesting distinction, though. In the States, obviously federally illegal, but we're talking about THC there. So on the CBD side, you can actually get that in most OECD countries, most of Western Europe. You can actually just walk into Aldi in, Italy or Switzerland and buy, CBD.
That's the really affordable CBD, I think.
Yeah, but in terms of as long as it's less than, I think, 0.3% or something, it's, depending on where you are, which still theoretically could have enough THC in it to activate the CBD. What are your thoughts on a situation like that in Australia where CBD is freely available?
It's going to happen pretty soon. I mean, it'll be over the counter. Well, when I say freely available, it's over the counter. So I think that practically that is you seek to the chemist or the pharmacist, and he or she will then go back and give it to you if they think it's appropriate. So it's not like really light beer. Dim and I are old enough to remember, when you used to be able to go and get a light beer at like 2% or so in. Yeah, you used to be able to buy that at the deli.
I'm on 00. Sticks. That's how well I'm going.
But that's that's not going to hurt anybody. But look, I for some people, and Dim is one of them, THC is an important part of his treatment, according to Dr. James. And you really do need to go and see a doctor to do that. Now, in the States, I think it's 40 or 50% of the individual states have legalized it. But that you can't transact. The universities, and that's why we're lucky in Australia. We've got a
pathway.
Yeah, and the universities can do research. That's the key thing. In the US, they can't take federal government funding on the one hand and touch proper cannabis research on the other. So the trial we're doing with Peter Brookner, who I mentioned earlier, is because we can. It was legalised. Both sides of Parliament were in favour of it, and it's so in many ways Australia's leading.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think we are on the medicinal. There's an enormous amount of research going on and partnerships in the private sector. I think just the other thing to note is as well, just the sheer number of authorized prescribers of medical cannabis has really gone up in the last few years. And I guess to anyone listening, of course, as Sticks and Dimmer has mentioned, always speak to a doctor about a potential treatment. But the good news is that there are now a significant nearly 2,000 authorized prescribers. So, it's not as difficult as it was maybe 5 years ago to find someone that actually knows a thing or two about medicinal uses of cannabis.
You know what, Dr. James, Dr. James, he's a GP, but he's told me he's almost exclusively medicinal cannabis now. A lot of those authorized prescribers are just doing it almost as specialists and very little GP work. And they tell me, and I speak to lots of them, that it is so gratifying because a lot of their patients are at their wits' end. And when I first got involved in this, there were, well, in fact, I've got, my parents, friends that I've known are in nearly 80 are using it, and it's a life changer for them. And we're all living longer. There's no good living long if you're in agony. And so, a lot of these GPs that I speak to get a real kick out of it. It's bloody hard work being a general practitioner, particularly during COVID. And James is one of many that are actually migrating nearly exclusively to cannabis because they tell me that it's not uncommon for people to be breaking down and just so grateful that, they've got a solution. And you think about chronic pain, 2/3 of it is for chronic pain. So the definition is it's 3 months minimum. So you wind the clock back to 3 months. What was that? Melbourne Cup Day? Imagine being in agony for that period of time. And the flip side is it makes it very difficult to sleep. And you're under stress. So yes, authorized prescribers numbers are up. So is sales are going berserk. I think it's only a matter of time before the driving rules catch up.
Yep,
that's just a joke, frankly.
Yes,
and 3 months on chronic pain is the minimum. Some of these people have been living in agony for years, some decades, and they haven't been able to find that relief. And then all of a sudden, this is what GPs say all the time. They're like, I've got this new tool in my toolkit that I've been practicing for 30 years, and all of a sudden, I've got this whole new drug that is giving people relief that they never thought they'd find for the rest of their lives, which is phenomenal. And on top of that, it's also, you're talking about 80-year-olds or 50s, 60s, but we hear stories all the time of people who at 1 5, 15 with autism, different conditions, or, muscle spasticity, which may have prevented them from playing sport in the first place. But now they've got a new lease on life because they're actually able to coordinate their limbs in a way that they're actually able to engage again. So,
and also just 3 months as the clinical, I guess, diagnosis. I find that, just astonishing, especially in the context of, I went in for some shoulder surgery a few years ago, and they gave me opioids, as is so often the case, to manage the acute pain in the aftermath. And I remember the anaesthetist saying to me, don't be on these for any longer than about 10 days, because you'll actually at that point start to trigger dependency in your opioid receptors. So that's really what we're dealing with in the landscape.
Do you see that in the sport? Do you see people that actually, unfortunately, slip into a bit of a dependency state?
Well, we're probably very fortunate in the industry we're in. We've got outstanding doctors. Like, there's no safer place to be than an AFL environment with regard to medical practitioners. So we don't necessarily see it in the game, but after players leave the game, because they've got significant injury history, and there is a reliance on these things. And I'm not going to lie, I reckon when I probably finished, it was like, the dosage of, and I couldn't get my hands on the things that I needed, but the reality is I was taking more than excess of, Nurofen and these sort of things to deal with the pain, which, is not great.
Yeah.
That's where, CBD is so beneficial to the body, because it is that natural product and it hasn't got that addictive, trying to think of the word, Sticks, help me out, that addictive nature. Yeah. So this is why it's just so important that people, if they have got issues like these, go and see a medical practitioner such as Dr. James to go through a process and find out whether it's the right product for them, because it is a game changer and life changing, as I've figured out.
Yeah, it's also interesting, and we could do a whole segment on this, so we won't dive into it too far. But obviously, the sport is given quite a bit of airtime, let's say, to concussions and MND and these types of conditions. And I dare say there's a lot of research currently happening, and definitely we know there's prescriptions going out for those conditions. And when you're talking about just the pain, then also cognitive conditions that might, spur on from 10 plus years in a contact sport, let's say.
I think that there's a lot of anecdotal talk about that. One of the things that, when I first got involved, I remember ringing Dr. Harry Unglick, who's just retired, my doctor, used to be at North Melbourne and been around a million years. And I called him and said, what does the medical profession think about medicinal cannabis? And his answer was immediate: huge potential, not enough research. And I think that's very appropriate. The little bit I've learned is concussion and cannabis and research and potential. That's it. Depending on who you talk to. I read a document that a guy wrote from the NFL, a professor, neurologist, saying, that begging Commissioner Goodall to fund a trial. He basically said, the only way this is going to be done is you've got to fund a proper clinical trial, and because it could help. In his opinion, it would help recover from and protect. So this was a profound document that he wrote. And talking to doctors, there's nowhere near enough evidence yet in that regard. And I think that's in the pathway. And a lot of the doctors, we estimate 90% of GPs are waiting for that evidence, and maybe 5 to 10 are already open-minded, and there's 10% who aren't terribly, supportive. The pain college are not yet fully supportive because there's not the evidence. So the trial we're doing is, it's our formula. It's a chronic pain. Apparently, it's the only one of its kind on earth. Phase 2, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, proper trial that will be submitted to peer review, and we're going to start that this year. And Peter Brookler's doing it. So that's a pretty big step for us. But it's responding to what the medical profession looking for, demanding really, which is proper gold standard evidence, and it's expensive, time consuming, and there's not much of it. And a lot of that goes back to the US. All the heavy lifting typically is done in Europe and the US because they got the market. And the fact that there's this federal prohibition has given Australia a little window.
I was going to say, it might end up being that we end up doing that sort of much needed concussion and medical cannabis research here in Australia, just with the landscape that we're in over here. gents, we know you're busy, so we'll wrap up. But I've one last one for Dimmer. Mitch and I are long-suffering Essendon tragics. Might we see you back at the club one day in some capacity, or are you pretty comfy in Tiger?
You've used it for your own personal desires here, Andrew. On company time, no less.
Well,
You're muted, mate. This is his
No,
problem.
I'm not. It's a gag, Sticks.
even better every time. We'll assess the
Hey,
tape
man,
afterwards and
seriously.
we'll do a bit of lip reading there. I assume you were telling us about the year that you'll be returning to the club. So thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate your time and your insights, and really love the leadership that you guys and Leven Health are committing to on this. We certainly believe in it. We're really grateful for your advocacy.
Can I just, before we go, just ask Damien if you can tell us about, was it your first game against the Pies, Anzac Day, and you ran out, tiny, scrawny, little insignificant, and played on Tony Shaw? Tell the audience and the boys how you were greeted by
the Collingwood faithful.
Tony Shaw, the Collingwood captain, one of the most pugnacious opposition. And how did he respond to you running out at the middle of the MCG?
It was quite funny, back in that day, there was quite a bit of banter going back and forth. I remember Hawkie running out to me, and he just literally started laughing. He said, "They cannot be serious."
That's good.
I looked around. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You." I am Tony Shaw. You. So anyway, it was,
dear.
It was an incredible feeling. But he's one of the great men. So fantastic fella.
It is amazing though when you see the new draftees. They have their first year, and then all of a sudden, in about year 3, they suddenly sort of bulk up a little bit. And you sort of forget just how little they are when they first come into the system. But many fond memories watching you back in the day, Dimmer, in the red and black.
Yeah, Sticks, how many games did you play out of this?
Okay, so I played 32 games for North. In our day, the average player played 30. So,
no worries. So after you played the game, did you pull your shorts up that little bit high? Because your shorts were that high when you played. Unbelievable.
And I used to have my socks pulled up, and I wore a long sleeve jumper. There's not very few things as attractive as a North Melbourne long sleeve jumper.
By the way, it was me that egged your house too, by the way.
Yeah. That's another story. Gotta go, gents.
No, thanks so much, guys. Appreciate your time. We'll look forward to speaking again soon.
Been a pleasure. See you guys.
Right,
Cheers,
guys.
lads.
Bye.
Hey guys, Andrew Dowling here, Mitch Kurtz, and thanks for joining us for another episode of the AltMed podcast. Make sure to hit like and subscribe to stay up to date with all that we have coming. All things AltMed? Yeah, that too. Okay.